registration. Through discussions, we're looking at maybe $900, so an increase of roughly $100. That would result in, pretty easy math with that, about $120,000 of revenue that we would generate in addition to what we're already collecting. All right, so that would increase that revenue by $120,000. Of the increase in revenue, that's roughly 20 to 25% of the revenue increase. So we're trying to make sure we stay with some of those fundamental principles that we have of minimizing the subsidizing of the existing facilities, subsidizing new. That's when we change our application fees, as well as the large facilities subsidizing some of the smaller facilities. This is a step, and that's why I've entitled this the first step, towards where we think we need to go with the oil and gas well facilities. Ultimately, oil and gas is a very large part of our program, and it roughly funds a small percentage of it, so we're going to be increasing that first step now. Also, through some discussions, initially we hadn't proposed raising the administrative fee. We were proposing to keep that the same and looking at a fee increase of roughly almost $46 per ton. Through some discussions and through aligning this with one of our fundamental principles is that the big shouldn't overly subsidize some of the smaller facilities. That's what this gets at. So we are looking at an increase in the administrative fee of roughly $100. So that would generate an additional $27,500 because there's about 275 facilities that pay that admin fee. Some of those pay a very large per ton fee. Some of them don't pay a very large per ton fee. So the impact is going to vary depending on the specific situation of that facility. By far the largest increase is that we're looking at is about $45.37 per ton, which at 49,000 tons roughly generates that amount of money that's on there. That's about a 300 some odd thousand increase in revenue compared to the current rate. All right, so what I want to remind folks of as we move forward is that we're not increasing the revenue beyond what we have historically collected. Because of the decline in fees, we're not able to collect the same amount of revenue, so we need to adjust the fee rate to roughly collect the same amount of revenue. And so as the emissions go down, fee rates on a per ton basis go up. Those are that's some of the information that I just wanted to make sure we were clear on. We haven't increased our appropriation since 2009. Actually, it's less. We've made some efficiency gains. We've got more in the works. We're going to try to remain as efficient as possible, and communicate with you on a frequent basis on this, because even though we're trying to target roughly the same amount of revenue that we have historically collected, there is an impact on each of these facilities when we increase that per ton rate, and we do recognize it. The other thing that we haven't communicated very well is that we haven't increased fees since 2009. And this is something that I know I and others feel very strongly about, is we don't want to increase fees until we absolutely need to. And maybe it would have been easier had we been doing $1 or $2 per year over the last 10 years. And as I do the math, it doesn't make sense to me, because we would have probably collected more money from you earlier or for longer periods of time than we're asking for today. And so I do think that we're at the point now where we've made all the changes that we can reasonably do at this point in time, and that we really do need to initiate this package in front of BER on June 8th, at least ask the board to do that. So let me talk a little bit about the process, and then I'll pause them for a moment for some questions. On June 8th, for those who haven't been around the BER process, we are requesting that the board initiate fees. So we will go in front of the board, ask the board to approve initiation. They will assign a hearings examiner to conduct a hearing, and then there will be a final action, which Liz mentioned is hopefully in October. This slide up here is what we take to the board for initiation. Now the board undertakes comment and everything like that, and the comment will be on whether or not the board should initiate. this fee package? And if so, how is the scope of that initiation set? And so we've worded this such that there's the ability, and this is through discussions with a lot of the stakeholders, that we are saying we want to collect up to $45.37 per ton. That way, if for some reason it has to come down, we don't anticipate asking for more, it's still within the scope of the notice and can be, we don't have to renotice and go through this process over again. We really need this to be finalized so that we can get the bills mailed in November. And there will be a time in November that we might even go negative, but we've recently gone negative. We want to minimize that amount of time that we do that so that we can start getting some revenue coming in moving forward. So this is what essentially we will be taking to the board. There's also a statement of reasonable necessities. There's a small business impact analysis that's been required by the legislature now that we need to include in that. And then there will be a hearing where we will go to the hearing. It will be scheduled roughly with July, August. We think we will let everybody know. And we will go and we will submit testimony, and that's when we really dial in and say, yes, we want you to do $900 on the admin, $900 on the registration fee, and $45.37 per ton on that. That would be how the department would request the board to act. There is also the opportunity for others to engage in that process, both at initiation at the hearing, and I believe they will take public comment at the final action as well. So I'm going to stop there for a moment and first go to the phone and see if there are any questions or any concerns about what I spoke of.
Dave, this is Jim. Could I just clarify something about the meeting schedule? Liz mentioned a August 10th board meeting, and she mentioned the regional haze program will be discussed there. Does that mean there won't be any discussion of the fee meeting at that board meeting, or there isn't any intention to anyway?
Unless the board decides at initiation that they want to conduct a hearing and it's part of that August board meeting, which I think is highly unlikely. So I would say, Jim, most likely not. There shouldn't be any discussion on fees.
Okay, so there will be a hearing specifically dedicated to the fees. I got it.
Yeah, generally they assign the board's attorney as a hearing examiner, and they, we schedule a hearing, get a room, and take testimony.
And Jim, we'll let you know when that is. We'll send that date out to the CAC.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any other on the phone? Any other questions on the phone? How about in the room?
I have one.
Ms. Debbie.
Looking at the language about the air pollutants by the facility during the previous calendar year, I know there was discussion about a previous calendar year, not the previous, and I was just wondering if that idea was discarded or where
Yes, and for the benefit of those folks at the March meeting, I think it was Talon brought up that it's kind of hard to budget. And so what we were looking at is not running into that same budgetary constraint in future years. Could we use 2017 calendar year emissions for this billing year as well as the next billing year? And then we would be 2 years removed from the emission inventories to when the bills were sent. As we talked through that with other stakeholders, it really didn't work out too well. So we are now looking just at the standard billing process, and it's the previous year. And did we get that right on?
Yeah, it's right. I just wanted to make sure that I understood why it was on.
Thank you for bringing that up. Yep.
And then one other correction on there is that we have emitted struck in that same sentence, and that will not be struck.
Yeah, air pollutants emitted by the facility, just to be clear. So I would fully anticipate that given the changes that we're seeing now and the changes in emissions and those that will be coming in the next 3 to 5 years, we'll probably be in an annual cycle of fees and emission inventories and working with facilities to get emissions information just as quickly as possible so that we can work through the process and you all know how to budget for these bills as well.
I guess my concern is that we've already experienced changes, I guess, in regards to the fee and the personnel cuts that have been happening, people that are not being replaced. Our inspector was changed already. And that's disappointing because we were just getting our previous inspector up to speed, for a facility our size and complexity, that length.
This is Abby, and I was just wondering if something happened to the audio. Can't hear anybody now.
Abby, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Abby, but I can't hear them.
Oh. Okay, yeah.
I heard something.
Yeah, I'm the same way, Abby. I hear you guys, but I can't hear the meeting. Just stated.
Oh, no.
I wish I could tell them to hold on.
Yeah.
Hold on.
I can text Abby.
Can you text her real quick and ask her to just let everybody know that we're working on it? Thank you.
Well, that'll cover her and Todd, but.
I only have Rebecca's email. I was gonna.
She can maybe say it on the phone, because you got.
Hang on.
I think I may hang up and just try to call back in.
Somebody did notice I saw on Ashley Jones.
Yeah, that's me. I'm on the. I just put a message in the Skype. It looks like Rebecca is typing back. So
Okay. Good enough. Thank you.
And then we will go back to you. Thank you for accommodating the interruption.
I thought it was me. I thought it was my phone.
I'll just let Rebecca handle it.
Or lack of funding, we didn't pay our power bills.
Right? I hate when that happens.
I think if we just pause until Devin can figure it out.
Okay. Did you get it?
That's funny because it's the message it gave me was your connection error is now fixed.
Pretty much. This is definitely. But I would just say, can you let everybody know we're working on it to stay on the line for now?
Yeah.
Yeah, I will text Abby too.
Thank you, Deb.
They keep coming up with their office number, which isn't helpful at the moment.
we can hear them, but they can't hear us.
They want to know, do they need to hang up and call? All right, let's see. What happened here? That's what it sounded like. Yeah, and it had a message that said your connection problems are being fixed.
Can you hear us
We
now?
can hear.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Somehow I got muted.
We can hear
I
you.
can hear you now.
That's bizarre. Uh-oh.
All right, you can hear us okay.
Yep.
All right, somehow you were muted.
We were.
Or somebody, yeah, we were muted. And you weren't, we can hear you.
That's weird.
Okay,
That's tricky.
all right. And Peggy Trank stepped out for a minute, but you want to go ahead?
Yeah.
Okay. So my concern is that, we're setting these fee changes, to accommodate a level of personnel that you're at right now. And we're already feeling the pains of the reduction that's happened and the rearranging that's happened. So I guess I'm wondering what's going to be done to be able to restore personnel or to accommodate, the fact that there is a really large workload on these inspectors and, to mitigate further changes. For a facility our size, we try and take that time with the inspector to help them understand what's going on, not only for their safety, but obviously for them to be able to, navigate the regulations and everything that they need to for a refinery. But that's an investment that we make. And, that's a time investment that the inspector makes as well. And so, for those changes to happen, and it's nothing against our new inspector, I'm sure he's wonderful, I've met him and everything. But I don't want to see that continuing to happen. I want to know that we're not just going to try and maintain the status quo going forward, the minimal staff. Is there anything thing that we can do going forward. Not just to accept this, but to say, okay, what would we need to be able to get to a place where staffing is, has some breathing room? Or I feel like it's so short-staffed right now that there just isn't that room to really fully accommodate all the operations that need to happen.
Well, that's an excellent question, and in there, I really appreciate the support for the state program. I mean, and that's kind of what I'm reflecting into the words that you're sharing. And yes, there is something that we need to do. This is step one for this. This is to make sure that we get the revenue necessary to support the program appropriately next year. We still have to figure out a long-term, mid to long-term fee structure, maybe restructure, if you will,
Right.
moving forward. And that is, all right, the next 20 years of the Montana's Air Quality Program, what does it look like? The current fee structure and the basis for the fees is based on what we've seen over the last 30 or 40 years. And the future is very different than the past. Just if you look at the number of facilities able to pay the emissions. In 2009, I found something, it was like 98,000 tons that we billed for. And now we're less than 50. And that number is going to continue to decline. But yet there's still regulatory requirements. But those regulatory requirements aren't incorporated into this fee structure. You know, we don't bill for new source performance standards or MACT implementation. That's all part of either a Title V fee, which is on a per ton basis. We also have to look at some of the other air quality impacts. Quite frankly, there are some that ought to be supported maybe by general fund and not necessarily on stationary source fees moving forward. I think of some of the smoke forecasts that we do from forest fires. Those are not permitted. We have a statute that restricts how we collect and how we spend our fees. And so part of that conversation that we will need to take in the off season, if you will, is with all of the stakeholders and say, what does this program need to be? What are the resources that we need to have? How do we fund it? And what are some of the impediments? Do we need to get in and change our statutes? I would say long-term, yes. We're not ready to do that for the 2019 session. You know, but certainly the 2021 session, we need to be able to do that. What you're experiencing with turnover, yes, it's happened as long as I've been in this bureau. We have a lot of turnover anyway. We have a lot of good people, unfortunately, that walk out the door for a variety of reasons. I don't know exactly what the right number of FTE for this bureau is, but I know that the FTE that we have need to be different than the FTE that we used to have. They need to be more well-rounded air quality professionals and not focus just on permitting or compliance or monitoring. They need to be able to do a variety of things. And so those are some of the things we're trying to develop, which will minimize the numbers of employees that we have, that we need to fund, but also maximize the air quality benefit that we derive from each employee. So that's a long-winded way of saying we've got to restructure this program so it's sustainable, appropriately sustainable moving forward. You know, with that. Peggy.
Just a question, so in other conversations, if you landed on the previous calendar year, if that, I think you'd mentioned that for those folks who had their budget already set, that you can extend payments out or something in this first year.
That is correct.
To give them more time to plan for that.
That is correct. We're not going to, thank you for bringing that up as well. Bills go out in November, they generally go out with 30 days, and then there's the opportunity, it's discretionary for penalties and interest, you know, for that. If folks need additional time to make the payment, we can accommodate that in the existing program. We don't need to change that, and maybe we should try to get that in the testimony. So we're not going to go out and collect penalties and interest on those folks who didn't budget for that. So yes, make some payments.
Installments.
Leave us a credit card installment.
Yeah, once a month.
Yeah. Yes, rent to own. Any other questions? All right, I got a big one. for you. If folks, is there anybody who would not be supportive of this that you would be willing to share? Trying to gauge how we write this up, how we reflect the stakeholder process moving forward. And I will share with you that I wouldn't go out and certainly cavalierly state that people are supportive of this. I think it's hard to support increasing fees. What I'm looking for is saying, well, is there opposition to that so that we can gauge, do additional outreach in the remaining hours that we might have?
Dave, I don't believe Talon will oppose this. And we definitely support the restructuring effort going forward.
Jim, thank you for sharing. I appreciate that. Part of what we need to identify, just so folks know, is that if there's any controversy associated with rulemaking, of course, there's governor's memos, all sorts of things that need to go out. We've said there's always, anytime you're dealing with fees, there's a potential for controversy. And if I knew that for sure, I would want to go back and say, okay, yeah, for sure there is, and be able to accurately reflect some things. Okay, well, first, thank you very much, especially to Peggy and Alan for spearheading a lot of conversations with regard to this. I really appreciate all of the stakeholder involvement, all of the hard questions, and just the willingness to even communicate with the department in this effort. And we will move forward and prepare accordingly for the initiation on June 8th. All right, so the next item on the agenda is Rebecca is going to take the last two items, I think, that we have. All right, first, registration updates, and then regional haze, right? Okay, thank you.
Okay, all right. Okay, can everyone hear me okay? Just assume yes. Hopefully we haven't muted ourselves again. Anyone on the phone?
Yeah, we can hear it now.
Okay, all right, great. Okay, so for those who don't know me, Rebecca Harbage, I'm a planner here in the Air Quality Bureau at DEQ, and I'm gonna just give you some updates on two of the projects we've been working on over the past few months. The first one, this fits really nicely into the budget context that Dave just provided you with. This is really an effort to streamline our work and become more efficient in what we do and a part of our program. And then after I talk about this, I'm going to jump into a different effort. We'll talk about regional haze very briefly, where we want to make sure that we're still in the driver's seat on projects that have potential to impact our state. And you know, even though we have these resource concerns that you just heard from Dave, we do hear you that you want us to be in the driver's seat instead of EPA, and so we are making strides to take back the regional haze program as well. So to start with the registration project. Just take this. Okay. Sorry about that, I'm having slide changing issues. That's the one. This one. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so given the resource and budget context that you just heard from Dave, we really want to make sure that we're seizing the opportunity to improve our programs. And what I mean by that is because of the resource situation we are in, we currently have a lot of support for working better and working smarter, getting more efficient. So that's an opportunity for the Air Quality Bureau to tackle some of these projects to streamline that really, if you've been around and been with us for a while, you know we've been talking about for probably the past decade. So we want to take advantage of that support and move forward to streamline. And what that means is building efficiency into our programs. And so for this project, that means strategically focusing our efforts where they're most needed and where we see the most environmental benefit. And so for this project, we're talking about focusing on portable sources, so crushers, screens, concrete batch plants, and asphalt plants. And this focus is because we know that these sources have relatively low emissions, they're relatively minor sources, and we also know that they have had nearly identical control options for years. And so we're currently taking these sources through case-by-case analysis for each permit. And really we know at the end of that analysis exactly what those permits will look like. So we want to change that process and make it a little less burdensome, not just for our staff, but also for all of you out there in the field. But in doing that, we're not talking about slacking off on air quality protection, of course. So we need to maintain equal or better protection of air quality, and that's not just because we work at DEQ and we like the environment. As you may know, our current permitting program is approved as part of the state implementation plan, and so that means it's been through a process of approval with the Environmental Protection Agency. And so anything that replaces that current permitting program will need to be at least as stringent or at least as protective as what is currently approved by EPA. So before we move forward and talk about where we're heading, I want to take a look back at where we've been. So you all know here at CAC that we have been presenting on this registration project over the course of the last year. Really starting at the beginning of 2018, we've stepped up our pace a little bit, I would say. We kicked off in January a presentation with the Montana Contractors Association. We also presented to the DEQ Open Cut program stakeholders. And out of those efforts, we put together a technical work group. And so we pulled together some representatives from the potentially affected companies based on all of that outreach we did at the beginning of the year. And we really wanted to put together a group of people who could help us look at the details of what was going to be in rule and tell us whether it would work for their companies, whether it aligns with the current permits that they have and whether they'd be able to move forward and transition those permits into registration. And so in addition to technical work group meetings, we've also continued to provide CAC updates. And so I really do want to emphasize that even though we did put together this technical work group, we're not trying to remove CAC from the process in any way. We just wanted some technical experts who could really dive into the weeds so that we could work out the kinks, and then we can come back to CAC and report to you all on how we're moving forward with this streamlining effort. And so you'll see on here, we had a technical work group meeting and a brief CAC update in March. We also had a briefing to the Board of Environmental Review at the meeting in April, and that was really just, I think Liz gave them about 3 lines of an update on where we're headed with this streamlining effort in the context of the fee rules that are upcoming for the board. We also had another technical work group meeting just last week, so we got some additional detail and feedback from them last week, and today I want to talk a little bit further about what this program might look like and walk you through some of what I like to call the key pillars or the building blocks of the program. Another thing you'll see on here is we have drafted an environmental assessment, and that is currently circulating around with DEQ's policy staff. And so what that really means is that as we move forward with this rulemaking, we're doing an environmental assessment on the entire rulemaking project right now. And so that draft EA will track with the rules all the way through the process. So it will go out for public review, it will be reviewed by the board, there will be public comment and hearing opportunity on all of that, kind of as a package deal. So as I mentioned, we'll kind of walk through some of the building blocks. And before I walk through them, I do want to point out that most of these are all pillars of our existing permitting program. And so I'll note some of the little differences that you might see in the registration program, but really what we're doing is trying to change the process of going from permitting to registration. And so the control requirements and all of that are not changing. It's just the way those control requirements are applied to the sources, so via permit or via rule. So to start with, we're looking at registering facilities to operate at permanent or temporary locations, number one. What that means is that operations at temporary locations will be limited to 12 months. And that is very similar to the way we currently do a request to an intent to transfer location. If you transfer your permit to a new location, you're limited to 12 months at that new location before the permit has to be transferred back. So this is very similar. We're also looking at operations at each location that must comply with the emission controls and production limits in rule. And what that means, number 4 here, is that we're setting production limits for these rules that will prevent registered facilities from triggering any additional major source permitting requirements. And so we're proposing that this registration program will be limited to essentially minor sources. And so these production limits are intended to keep these sources out of triggering Title V major source requirements. This is pretty similar to what we do right now. We have a minor source permitting program. If these sources do get bigger, we're not saying that registration will limit all portable sources to being minor for the foreseeable future. If they do want to be bigger than these production limits, there is still the normal permitting and Title V permitting options available. And that would be exactly the same process that we do currently for those larger sources. This is a little bit different, so we're proposing to require that these facilities, when they do change location, they confirm with DEQ where they're located. So that's something that was a concern that has come up from our field services staff, where currently we get an intent to transfer notice, and it may be for a location where a facility ends up not actually moving. And from our side, we need to know where the operations are actually located around the state. Currently, we request that facilities let us know when they have moved somewhere, but it's not a requirement in our current permitting program. So we propose to include that as a required part of registration. We're also proposing to keep the public notification portion that is currently in our permitting program. The only difference here is we currently have requested or require that the sources publish a public notification and request for comment in the local newspapers. We're trying to change with the times. We recognize that newspapers maybe aren't the first place that people go to look for things like this. So one of the changes we're proposing is to move that public notice from newspapers onto the DEQ website. And so, of course, there will be a lot of education of both the sources and the public on where this information will be located moving forward. We're also stressing the fact that this is...
Can I ask a question about that?
Yeah, sure.
If you do that, is there any way to put it up on DEQ's website, like on a map, so that people can know where on the map to look for their area where a facility is going to be located? If it's a laundry list, it's not as useful. But I get moving away from newspapers, but people, they want to be able to look at the DEQ's website and quickly determine whether there's anything in their area. And if you could do it by map, maybe they can click on that number, it'd be easier for people to find.
Yes, we're working on that. So that we currently do, I think, at least internally to DEQ, we currently do have a map of all of these locations. And we are working as hard as we can to make sure that when this program is up and running, that public notice is tied to a mapping function. So it's as simple as someone going online and seeing where these are located. So that's our goal, yes. So last building block, we are also looking to require that an inventory of the registered equipment be kept up to date. And what I mean there is, we did a lot of talking internally about what exactly would be required to register. Is it an emitting unit? Is it a facility that's a cluster of emitting units? Is it the owner or operator of a company? And we don't want to be in the business of keeping an inventory of all of the emitting units as they move around the state. But we do recognize that in order to know what possible other regulations may apply, we do need to know what emitting units exist out there and in what combination. And so part of this program will be that the owner or operator comes in to get registered and is required to keep up to date an inventory of all of their equipment. One thing that may be a little different is we're not hoping to track each emitting unit around the state as they move. We're primarily interested in what types of operations are going to be located where, but just for the purposes of knowing what other requirements there may be at each site, we need to know what types, what emitting units may be there, so that we know when we go out in the field. Are there any questions on these before I move forward?
And you may answer these in your presentation, but I'll just ask them now. When will the public get an opportunity to say anything about a facility moving into their area? Is it only when you guys do the initial registration, or is it, I guess, when is the public able to engage? And the other is, will there be a timeline or termination on these rules, so that periodically DEQ has to review them and make sure there is no new technology that is available to control the emissions?
Sure, those are both good questions. Is this Anne? I think.
Yes, it is.
Okay, all right. So for your first question about public comment, you're right. The way this program is moving forward currently is the public comment period is going to be associated with the rulemaking. So there will be the rulemaking portion, and then there will be the SIP submittal portion. So there will be those two public comment periods. Currently, in our permitting program, when the public notice is posted in the newspaper, there is a request for comment to be submitted to DEQ with each of those intent to transfer notices. With this moving to a registration program where we won't be approving each registration, there really isn't an opportunity for meaningful comment. We won't be making a decision when someone comes in to register. So that public comment period is, as we currently see it, moving up to just with this rulemaking. And then for your second question.
Before you move on, is there any ability to allow somebody to object and resolve a conflict so that they don't? I mean, I doubt there's going to be any conflicts. I don't think we've had any registration programs so far, but you never know. It's going to be in a more populous area. So is there any way to have some type of process by which if somebody does move, they can object or somehow or another try to resolve something with you instead of having to go to court?
I'm looking at Dave.
Yeah.
He's wanting to jump in here.
Yeah, well, yeah, no, and that's a good point. I want to, from an air quality perspective, I'm not exactly sure what the objection would be. Certainly from a local land use zoning perspective, there's those options. There's still the open cut licensing opportunities as well for people to ask for public meetings or hearings or, you know, contest those types of things. I'm not exactly sure how we would build into a registration program similar to what we're doing with oil and gas and other registration programs around the country, an opportunity for an objection to an air quality registration.
I think, Dave, just because of the portable nature of these, I'd like to think about that a little bit more before you guys move forward. I just think that there could be some conflicts that could easily be avoided with just the right wording.
Yeah, no, I got you, and that's why I think Rebecca pointed out there would be the public notification, certainly of any moves that would occur in the subdivisions. I recognize how sensitive those are, at least from a non-air quality perspective.
And maybe air quality. You never know what people might add. But anyway, you can answer my next question too. Sorry about the interruption.
No, I'm trying to remember your second question now.
A periodic review of the actual rule
Right.
to make sure that they're really best available.
Well, this is Dave again, Ann. It hasn't changed in 40 years. I guess if it changes 25 years from now, we can look at it, but I don't think that we should put a time frame in there that we review this periodically. I think there's an opportunity for citizens and others, and I know you're familiar with this, to petition the board to change rules and whatnot if it's ever necessary. I mean, realistically, the reason that crushers are a good candidate for this is that the permits are going out nearly identical, and they have done that for the last 30 or 40 years, and I don't really see it changing. Are you still there?
I lost Dave. Did anybody else lose Dave?
Are you there now?
I am.
Yeah, for some reason, every now and then we hear a noise and you get automatically muted. Or we get muted. Yeah, maybe it's my voice.
You were talking.
Yeah.
I was talking. Well, did you get that? Did you get the whole response? In essence, here, I'll just restate it. Realistically, I don't see these things changing in the next 20 years. If there was some super duper razoo technology or something else that we can or should require, I think there's opportunities to petition the board or get this in front of the department through a Cac process or some other stakeholder-driven process, so that we can look at it at that point in time. But we are not planning on putting something in rule.
Dave, just so you know, I object to that. I think that at least every 10 years you guys should review this and at least go before the board to verify that nothing has changed. To say that nothing is ever going to change again, I think is misguided in this type of registration program where people really, once you make the rules, they're cut out of the process.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions on the phone? Or comments?
Hi, Rebecca.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Jocelyn with EPA.
Hey, Jen.
Say, could you repeat, what sources this will apply to? And I know you've told me this before, but it came up again today, and I was just curious.
Sure. Yep, we're looking at writing these rules so they apply to gravel crushers, gravel screens, so non-metallic mineral processing plants, and also concrete batch plants and asphalt plants.
Okay, so gravel crushers, gravel screens, asphalt plants, and concrete batch plants?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Anything else before I move on? Okay, well, hopefully jump to the next slide. Okay, going on to the next slide. We have way too many screens open on this little laptop. I wish you could all see it on the phone. That's quite intense. That's why we have a tech guy. Anyway, a little bit of timeline for this project, just so you have an idea of where we're heading this year. Obviously, you can see the first thing is this cuts off in January, February 2019. So what I'm not going to talk about on this timeline is where we go after that. So we've got all the way up to adopt this program, and then obviously there will be some timeline associated with how this gets implemented. I'm not going to talk about that today. That still has to be worked out. Right now, we're trying to get ourselves to the end of this year and get this program adopted. We are having some conversations internally about what that implementation might look like, but that's still going to be a conversation that we'll provide updates to CAC on at a future date. So first of all, you can see today, May 22nd, we have a CAC update. As far as additional outreach that we plan to do, we are hopefully planning to present again to the Open Cut stakeholder group in middle of July. We may also have an additional work group call just to hash out whether the technical details are where we thought they were going to be in those draft rules. That would be around August. After all of that and before we go to the board with initiation, we plan to come back to CAC sometime in early to mid-September. We're just talking about after Labor Day, kind of give everyone some time off for their summer, have school start again, and then we'll get back to CAC with an update before we go to the board. So these are just some of the, I guess the steps that are associated with dates or easily associated with dates. We also have a lot of, okay, stepping back for just a second, we also have, just for context, I put the fee rules on here. So just so everyone can see the dates that Liz mentioned earlier, the June 8th initiation of the fee rules, and then the October 5th adoption of fee rules. So that adoption of fee rules will be at the same board meeting, we hope, as the initiation of this registration project. As far as the other timelines, we, as I mentioned, are working on a draft environmental assessment for this project. And so that is currently being reviewed internally at DEQ. I think we're on our second draft at this point. And we also have to build in a lot of time for legal review. That's partly because I'm not a lawyer, so I can write things in rule, but I don't necessarily know if they are going to do what I think they're going to do. And so we have our great staff attorneys here that can help us figure all of that out. We also want to make sure that we build in plenty of time for EPA review. And so as I mentioned earlier, this program is going to require approval by EPA so it can take the place of our existing permitting program in our state implementation plan. And so what you see on here for EPA review is really a very preliminary review to make sure that what we're proposing is going to be approvable. Once we get through the rulemaking and we adopt rules, all of this will be submitted into the SIP, State Implementation Plan, and so there will be an additional opportunity for public comment there and an additional EPA review once it is submitted officially into the SIP. You also see on here additional stakeholder review, and so what I'm talking about there is not just the open cut stakeholders, the work group, but also CAC. We know that there are a lot of folks represented in CAC that aren't necessarily a part of the open cut group or our technical work group. So we want to make sure that we keep all of you in the loop as we move along too. And then, of course, the official public comment period will take place after the board initiates rulemaking. So as I said, we're targeting that October 5th board meeting to ask the board to initiate these rules. We're trying to build in a little flexibility there. So there is another meeting in December, and hopefully the board will initiate in October. But if we do have to push anything back in this timeline to December, we can still get this initiated before the end of the year. That's our goal. That was the implementation part that I was talking about. It happens after early 2019, after the rules are adopted. And then also what I just mentioned with the SIP submittal and the SIP comment period. That'll all happen after rule adoption. Are there any questions on the timeline? If not, I'll just move on to regional haze. I guess before I do that, are there any questions remaining on the registration project in general? Yeah, Peggy.
The fees, they're aware that's going to be the fee because you're trying to adopt the rule that goes with
I'm sorry.
Oh, the fee, we're back to the fee rule, so they're built, these guys are built into that portables, right? No.
So, yeah, to address that question, what Liz and Dave have been moving forward with for the fee changes does not affect the portable source category. And that's because we really need to figure out how we're moving forward with this registration before we can decide how those fees will balance out.
Probably next year.
Yeah.
They will get, this year when the bills go out, they will still have a Montana air quality permit. And right now it's $800 per Montana air quality permit. They will stay status quo for that. The next year, we will look, I'm not exactly sure once we go to a registration system, we're not sure how that funding will shake out. Whether people have the equal number of registrations, same as MAQPs, is it going to be based on equipment, moving, stuff like that. We have to figure all of that out. I can see a matrix, but I couldn't tell you what's in the matrix.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question. Anything else on registration? Okay. I'll move on to regional haze. Hopefully this is just a really quick update. Really there are two pieces to what I want to talk about today. The first is this what I'm going to call the transition of authority. And so as most of you know, we currently have a federal implementation plan for the first planning period of regional haze. So what that means is for the period of 2008 to 2018, EPA is in charge. That's where we are today. There is a second planning period for regional haze coming up. It's actually 2018 to 28, but those state implementation plans are due in 2021. So that's the second piece of what I'll talk about, is moving forward for submitting a SIP by 2021. So this first statement, it says that we're moving forward to gain administrative authority over the regional haze program prior to the submittal of that next SIP. And what that means is we're really looking to gain administrative authority over the existing regional haze program. So as it sits with EPA under a FIP for that 2008 to 18 planning period. So got my fancy graphics here. We're currently under a FIP. We're trying to move that requirement to a SIP for that initial planning period. And so as you may know, within the FIP, there are emission limits that are based on what's known as the best available retrofit technology, or BART, for certain large facilities around the state. Some of those include the Ash Grove, Montana City cement plant, the Old Castle Trident plant, and then also coal strip units 1 and 2 were involved in that FIP initially. You probably know that those limits for coal strip units 1 and 2 were remanded back to EPA, vacated by the courts. And so those currently sit with EPA, waiting for reconsideration of those limits. For these other two, the process we plan to take to move those from FIP to SIP is to ask the board to adopt an order, basically incorporating those limits and requirements from the FIP into state regulation. And so that would give DEQ the authority to implement that program of control that's currently included in the FIP for those sources. And we're looking at the August 10th board meeting for that. So that's what Liz mentioned earlier when she talked about having regional haze at the August board meeting. We will be asking the board to adopt an order to adopt and incorporate those FIP requirements. And then we will be submitting that board order and those requirements into our state implementation plan. We're working closely with EPA on that process as well. And so hopefully we can align those steps and make sure that we're transitioning everything appropriately from FIP to SIP. As far as the coal strip units 1 and 2 limits go, those, as I said, were vacated by the courts. They're sitting with EPA. At this time, we don't have any plans to address those limits. Our feeling is that those are in EPA's court right now. Are there any questions on this part, this transition of authority? Sounds like no. Okay. So moving forward, talking about our progress toward that 2021 state implementation plan submittal. These are a bunch of steps up here. Just to give you a little bit of context, this box represents where we are today. And so you'll see above that, we submitted a progress report for that first planning period back in November of last year. And that was really, it helped our staff kind of climb up the learning curve about regional haze since we hadn't been involved for a while. It let EPA know that it is indeed our intention to take back the regional haze program. And then we're also talking about this transition of the first planning period FIP to a SIP, hopefully by this fall sometime. And so as far as where we are now, we're currently talking with other Western states, with our regional organizations, to try to figure out how the planning for this second SIP is going to work. Part of that is we need to decide how to focus our attention on United States anthropogenic emissions. And so you may remember that in the first planning period, we were really looking at the haziest days. And so many of us who lived through last summer in Montana know that those haziest days are quite often wildfire smoke days. And so for this second planning period, we need to figure out how to just address what we can address through the regulatory context. We can't do anything about the wildfire smoke, but we can do something if there is a lot of haze contribution coming from anthropogenic sources. So that's part of this first step and this first conversation we're having with the region. We also really need to work on figuring out our emission inventory that's going to be used for the modeling. So right now that involves looking at the 2014 National Emission Inventory and just fact checking on our side, making sure that the numbers look good, that if we feed it into a model, we, Montana, will agree with what data is being fed into that. After that, we're looking at analyzing which sources around the state do have impacts on visibility at Class 1 areas on the most impaired days. So we're switching from calling them the worst days to the most impaired days. So that's where you'll hear that terminology come in. And then once we can identify which sources are having an effect on visibility on those most impaired days, then comes the control analysis. You may have heard of this as being called the 4-factor analysis. And so we'll be looking at those sources to see whether any additional controls are feasible or are reasonable for visibility improvement moving into the future. Part of this process also sets goals or benchmarks for 2028. That's the end of that second planning period. And that's just so we have something to measure our progress against when we're moving forward, looking at progress reports 5 years after the SIP, and then also getting to 2028. We also then, moving forward, will have a consultation period with our federal land managers, and also public review, of course, will be built into this as well. At the very last bullet here, you'll see that the SIP is due to EPA by July of 2021. And just to give you a little insider tip, because you're our stakeholders here in Montana, you may have already heard this, but I'll repeat it for you again. Here in Montana, we are hoping to submit that second SIP by early 2020. So we're hoping to move forward on a little bit of an accelerated timeline. And that is primarily because we are looking to get out ahead of the legislature, of elections that year, because all of those things, as you probably know, can be a real resource stuck on our staff time. So we're hoping to go forward with submitting a SIP in early 2020. And I really want to emphasize on all of these steps, that we plan to keep CAC involved and keep all of the affected industries involved as we move forward. So none of this analysis is going to be done here in DQ's vacuum. It won't be done, decisions won't be made just with our regional counterparts. We'll also be, of course, involving all of you in the discussions as we move forward through this analysis. I just wanted to provide a little bit of an update today because these conversations are starting at the regional level. We don't really have any more information to share on where any of this is headed at this point, but this is kind of what our timing looks like and what our next steps are. Anyone have questions?
Yeah, just can you talk about the impact on all of this to your budget and how it's going to get paid for?
I think that sounds like another Dave question.
Well, that's why we're investing so much in some of these efficiency gains through registration programs and other things, Ann. That's a very good question. We think that we can change a lot of our operations from things that don't provide the commensurate environmental benefit or air quality benefit compared to the resources that are expended before we go and ask for a fee increase. The Regional Haze Program is also part of the fee increase that I spent the first half hour talking about, that we need a certain amount of staff to run this bureau, and they need to be funded appropriately through fees or in some instances federal and or state general fund. We don't see right now a need to go for a decision package in the legislature to get an appropriation for Regional Haze. It doesn't mean that we won't be coming back to this group and saying, all right, 2 years from now as we get into, or 1 year from now as we get more into the Regional Haze analysis, we may need to increase fees based on Regional Haze, but we will have that conversation as we move forward. But it is a very good point. We are looking at all areas of the Bureau to look at the activities that we undertake, make sure every activity that we undertake provides a benefit, the maximum benefit possible, and that it's appropriately funded.
Thanks.
Any other questions on Regional Haze?
This is Dave Klemp again. Rebecca, back on, I should have done this on your previous slide. There's a different process for a board order than there is for initiation of rulemaking, and there will be an additional public comment period. There won't be another CAC meeting
Sure.
before that. You want to just let them know?
Sure.
So-
Yeah, that's a great question. I did not get into that. So when we're talking about the board order, as Dave mentioned, it's a different process slightly than when we go to the board and ask them to initiate rulemaking. Usually for a board order, we would go to the board packet gets mailed out about 2 weeks before the board meeting. And that meeting of the board would be both the adoption and the hearing for that. What we're proposing to do with this board order is we'd like to give everyone an opportunity to see what's in the board order and to weigh in and provide us with comments. And so we're planning to open a 30-day public comment period in advance of the August 10th board meeting. So you'll all see that come out. It'll be the board order incorporating the regional haze requirements for Old Castle and for Ash Grove, those 2 cement kilns. After the board meeting / hearing, the board will adopt, and then the process after that is we will submit that board order that's adopted into the SIP. So there will be another public comment period following the board meeting based around the submittal of that board order into the SIP. So what you'll see is a public comment period opening probably late June, and then another one after the August board meeting. Does that answer your question, Dave?
Yes, thank you. It's not the regional haze SIP for the next
Right.
planning period, but it's,
Right.
Extensive public comment, we hope, opportunities.
Right. And we're just, so a little bit more context on that board order. Right now, we're just looking at incorporating the language from the FIP that applies to those 2 facilities verbatim into a board order. We're not planning to change anything at this point, but you'll all have a chance to review that when the public comment period opens. Okay, if there aren't any more questions, that's the end of our presentations for today. So if there's general comment or general questions, we're all still here.
Yeah, this is Abby Krebsbach with MDU. I was just wondering from a timing perspective for 4-factor analyses and you're wanting to, kind of expedite the process of getting the SIP accomplished. If we as facilities are going to be doing a 4-factor analysis ourselves, that's just something that we want to think about budgeting for. And if you have any, let's see, early 2020 is when, I'm thinking we probably want to think about doing that either even later this year or 2019, just something to think about as we try to plan our consulting needs and processes there.
Sure, yeah, and that sounds about right to me. It's probably going to be at least starting later this year, and then going into early 2019 for those 4-factor analyses. And we actually just had the first call with a regional subcommittee talking about control measures, and specifically that subcommittee will be working on the process that all states will kind of go through to not just do the 4-factor analysis, but also some of the pre-screening that goes into that process as well.
Okay,
yeah,
great.
I think you're right, Abby. You're right on the timing.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Anything else?
Before we close out, just one more thing for the September meeting, after Labor Day, like Rebecca said, but I'm sure we'll be talking about the registration program. I'm guessing that'll be on our agenda, but if you guys have anything else that you'd like to talk about, just let Rebecca, myself, Dave, anybody here at DEQ in the Air Quality Bureau know and get those to us so we can get them on the agenda. And with that, thank you very much for joining us today. Thanks.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Zumba and Kyle, like Pilates, yoga, just fast. Yeah.
How many sessions a week do you do?
I do 3.
Oh, that's not too many.
Yeah, it's,
Lunchtime?
no, I do 6 a.m.
What's that?
I do 6 o'clock in the morning.
So,
So,
to get your kids out.
yeah, it's just too hard with kids, between work and kids, and I don't. And last year I was teaching 5, but it just is too much.
Is that capital?
Yeah. So, yeah, no, it's just too much. So.
So are you working out of state on a big facility?
Not, we were doing a lot of work in Nevada and I'm not doing as much right now. We're doing a fair amount of work in Idaho and Oregon.
Power plants or refineries?
No, wood products and